Welcome to Cult and Classic.
All right, friends and fiends of the pod. This is your host, Nate Wyckoff, writer and stand-up comedian. I wanted to bring this special episode to you today that I'm super excited about. We have Indie Meister General here, Donald Farmer. I guarantee if you listen to this pod, you have seen at least one and probably more Farmer movies. He's a legend. Joe Bob Briggs called him the one-man film industry of Tennessee. How are you doing, Don?
Oh, pretty good.
Right. Do you prefer Don or Donald?
I don't really care.
All right, sounds good. That's my favorite kind of thing because I never know what I'm going to say until I open my mouth.
Yeah, you can call me anything.
that's the attitude that probably has helped you, since your start. And you started in the 70s, right?
That's right. Yeah, I did my first movie in 73.
73, and was that so? I noticed when you look back through your fantastically large catalog, that was Despondent Yearning, right? Was the first one?
Yeah. Those are Super 8 silent movies.
That's fantastic. And I saw too that Sub Rosa Studios did a couple of short print runs in the Donald Farmer Collection 1 and 2, where they've put some of those together. I mean, they're shorts, but they're actually not that short, right? Most of them I think are probably like 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm, yeah, Despondent Yearning is about 30 minutes. The longest we did is of The Summoned, which was 40 minutes, and then we did several that were 15 minutes, and all of the Super 8 movies I did on in the 70s are released by Sub Rosa in the Donald Farmer Collection Volume 1 and 2, except for the second one I made where we couldn't find both reels. We could only find one reel, so that was the only one they couldn't put out. It was called Premonitions, about a girl with psychic power that sees the future. But unfortunately, we couldn't find all of that one, but we found all the others, which had been sitting in my closet for decades. So.
That's the kind of thing I remember a bunch of my friends and I making, short films in high school and finding those VHS tapes and just being so excited because it's like revisiting the past,
Yeah, and also these Super 8 movies, even though I shot them in the 70s, the color really holds up and the color hadn't faded at all, whereas with a lot of the 16 millimeter color prints I have, the color will just turn red on you and completely drain away. But these Super 8 movies, colors still look pretty good.
That's fantastic. And am I remembering correctly that you actually shot again on Super 8 for High 8, or was that just the look?
That was just the look they were going to, but they just wanted mainly it to be sort of a Dogma style video with no frills, not a lot of fancy lighting, and just shot on, they just basically wanted shot on really cheap video equipment. They didn't want us to shoot on anything fancy, so I just shot on an extremely cheap camera to make them happy.
It's funny you say they didn't want any lighting effects, because I kind of remember some color in yours. I think it stood out among those.
Well, yeah, we did use blue color gels and green color gels because I was shooting in a 2-car garage for some sequences that just had white walls, and there's nothing more aesthetically boring than putting actors against white walls. So what I did was I put some green gels on the lights and splashed the walls with green, so to at least put a little color in it, because I really hate shooting actors against white walls. That's one of my pet peeves.
I tell you, especially I review a lot of films, especially the quote unquote bad films, which are often my favorite, for horrornews.net. There's nothing that kills the moment more than a dull white wall and someone standing in front of it. There's no way to get the character lit well. Everything just sort of fades, and it feels like watching a home movie of someone that you're really not interested in.
The only thing worse is putting the actor too close to the white wall and then hitting them with direct light so that they have a giant shadow on the white wall everywhere they go. That's even.
I mean, you cut your teeth pretty early, and then I know you were doing journalism for these in the beginning, right? You were actually in Dawn of the Dead, right?
In Day of the Dead, yeah. I was a journalist in the 80s. I was at the same time I was a reporter for 2 newspapers. I was a reporter for the largest newspaper in Tennessee, the Nashville Tennessean, and then also a reporter for a daily paper in the town I lived in. And I would sometimes write an article and rewrite it and give one version to one paper and one version to the other paper. The Nashville paper wanted a story that emphasized the state implications, whereas the local paper wanted our stories that had the local angle. And while I was writing for these two newspapers, I also started doing magazine work, and it was the magazine work that had me end up on the set of Day of the Dead, because I was a feature writer for several magazines, probably the most famous one's Fangoria, but I also worked for this magazine called Fantastic Films, which ended up retitling itself and becoming Film Facts many years later. And then I also was the American correspondent for this French magazine called Le Grand Fantastique, which just means fantastic screen. So when I was on Day of the Dead, I was there representing two magazines. I was representing the old Film Facts when it was under the title Fantastic Films, and then I was also representing the French magazine. I gave them both exactly the same article, and then the French magazine translated it into French for their magazine, and then each magazine had different photos to accompany the article, and I think both magazines made it into a two-part article and spread it out over two issues, because my article on Day of the Dead was so long. But while I was when Laurel Productions that made it flew me up to Pittsburgh for the filming, they let it be known shortly before I left that they were going to invite me also to be a zombie in the movie. So that's how I came to be in it. They thought all the reporters would write better articles if we could write it from the perspective of being a zombie and being directed by George Romero.
That's fantastic.
So once I got up there, I was in the company of reporters from Cine Fantastique, and they had Kurt Loder from Rolling Stone was probably the most prominent among us, and then Michael Musto from Us Magazine was there, and there was about 15 or so of us, and they had us all be zombies so we could write the article about what it was like to be a zombie.
That's so great. You're gonna have me and the rest of our listeners up at the screen with a magnifying glass trying to pick out you and Loder and everybody else.
Yeah, I made it easy. I put my clip on YouTube where I think you just need to type in Donald Farmer, Day of the Dead, and I put my clip in slow motion, and it's really easy to spot me.
That's awesome.
I think I'm about 3 rows back in a pack of zombies, so I slowed it down where you can spot me easier, but I'm the tallest one in the group, so I stick out over everybody else's heads.
It's always nice to have like that one distinguishing feature when you're doing background work that just makes you pop out. And you're like, that's me.
I was hoping to be a front row zombie, but it was not the case.
Well, I think if I remember in
back row, yeah, they always put the short people in the front, so they shut.
It's just, I guess it just comes across as zombie etiquette. I remember, I think in Land of the Dead, they had so many at one point that they were talking about how the back row zombies would get barely any touch up. Like they'd just get a little bit here. You got red on your face, go. And then the front row zombies had all the applique and everything. And was it that way, or I guess Day of the Dead, there were many, but it was fewer in the grand scheme of his later stuff.
Yeah, what they basically did in Day of the Dead is they had Tom Savini there to do featured zombie makeups, and they had his assistants who ended up becoming as famous as him. They had his assistant, Greg Nicotero, who's now, in charge of makeup for Walking Dead and is also directing episodes. And so Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger, who's an Academy Award winner, they were among Tom Savini's assistants. He had several assistants, but those were the two most famous, Howard Berger and Greg Nicotero, and there were 2 or 3 other assistants that were in charge of zombie makeup. So what they did was the people that were featured front row zombies got made up by Mr. Savini, and then people that were second, third row, but still fairly visible like me, we were made up by either Greg or Greg Nicotero or Howard Berger. I was made up primarily by Howard Berger, but Howard only did my face and neck, and then they sent me through an assembly line for the touch-up. They had one person do my hands, one person do my hair, one person do my teeth, and then one person does your wardrobe. And then when you're at the end of the line, there was somebody with ratty-looking, nasty clothes to put on you to finish you off. And so I went through the whole zombie assembly line of all these people for the complete look.
That's awesome. Whenever I think about those scenes, I always wonder, like what prop closet has just a box of sticky, bloody, tattered zombie clothes,
Well, they had racks of these zombie clothes when I arrived, and they had them all neatly hung up, in perfect order. And so the wardrobe people, had all these clothes at their disposal, and then they would just size you up and pick out a size that they thought would approximately fit you.
That's great. That's funny that, you mentioned that, because I think looking at especially your later body of work up to now. I mean, I just watched a Hooker with a Hacksaw again yesterday, and
Mhm.
how much of the props do you literally have just a garage full of props, or do you do it on a film by film? You're like, all right, we need an arm here. What are we gonna do?
Oh, well, in that movie, I was fortunate enough to have a prop person who was also our art director and our effects guy. He did all three jobs. His name's Mason Roberts, and he's sort of a prop and effects wizard. His main job is that he's an antique restoration expert,
Huh.
and he's done very elaborate jobs. Like the city of Lexington hired him to restore their gigantic 100-year-old opera house, where he had to go into the building and restore all the embellishments on the wall and all the furnishings. So I was entrusted with a job that huge. But for us, he's worked on my last three movies, and we'll be working on my new one. He does Demons, and he does props. He does primary makeup effects, and then we also give him he does acting roles too. And so if I need some kind of prop, he'll look through his shop, and if he doesn't have it, he'll make it. Like for our new movie, we needed some giant pinchers to pull out a girl's tongue, and he actually had something like that already in his prop closet that we could use. And we also needed a set that we could be very bloody in and get blood all over the floor and have it be in a place where it wouldn't be a problem. And so Mason found us this warehouse that had concrete floors with drains in the floors so that you could make all the bloody mess you want. And then at the end of the day, you just get out a water hose and spray it all down the drain. And he found this room for us, and then he completely art directed the place and put up, all the props and settings and furniture in there. He found all of this. And so he's like he does several jobs. He's like a miracle worker.
That kind of touches on one of the things I love about, your entire body of work, really going back, is you use people over and over and over again, oftentimes in different roles, sometimes in front of the camera and behind the camera. And I can only imagine that kind of relationship building really helps get the final product. Because just being, having done PA work and some other, bit parts and things like that, so often on a set, especially the bigger the set, I feel like it's easy to get lost and sort of underappreciated. Like you just don't really feel like you're a part of the process. And I can only imagine that with you working with the same people over and over again in different roles and different aspects, kind of makes it kind of a community.
Yeah, I try to do that whenever possible. Sometimes we're too successful at it. Like in the 80s, we've worked with many people that became so huge that I couldn't afford them anymore. Like our makeup man, way back in 1987, when I made the original Cannibal Hookers, my primary makeup guy was Brian Sipe, and there's no way I could afford him now. Now he works for people. He does all of the X-Men movies. He did Schwarzenegger's makeup on the last Terminator film. He worked for David Fincher on the Benjamin Button movie with Brad Pitt. So he does all these huge movies. So he's really gone great. I mean, one of our actors, Ray McKinnon from Vampire Cop, actually won an Academy Award for Best Independent Short Film, and he was married to a famous scream queen who had been in this John Carpenter movie, Prince of Darkness, and so he and her produced the movie together, so they both got Oscars. So yeah, there's several people that have done our movies in the 80s that have either retired, like I did a whole string of movies in the 80s with Melissa Moore. We did Vampire Cop, Scream, Dream, and Compelling Evidence with her until she finally retired from making movies. And I did a string of movies with Michelle Bauer, and she's pretty much semi-retired now. So I usually like to work with people until either they retire or until they get so famous that I can't afford them.
I totally, and you mentioned Melissa Moore, and Scream Dream is my personal favorite, I think, of your films. I love that movie, and I am dreaming now that you've done some things like a new interpretation of Cannibal Hookers and things like that. I am dreaming of you doing a new Scream Dream. That would make me really happy.
That was a very sort of ambitious movie to try to do on such a low budget, because it required us to hire a rock group that could come up with these songs for us, and so we had all the added complication of having to. We had to book a recording studio in Nashville and record professional tracks of all their songs, so that when they perform them in the movie, they can be lip syncing to their professional tracks, because you can't really record live audio in a situation that wouldn't really sound very good. So, and we had to book a nightclub that we could pretty much take over and have the full run of a nightclub and get audience members. And then we had to have a full body head to foot demon makeup that Rick Gonzalez did for us. And Rick had also worked on zombie makeup he was also one of Savini's assistants on Day of the Dead. So that's how I heard about him. And so Rick has done several movies for me. He did Demon Queen, and he did Vicious Kiss with Margaret Hemingway. And so, that was a very ambitious movie to try to do with no more money than we spent on it.
As a note, I found an interview, you said that Demon Queen really didn't have great distribution. And I can vouch for that, because myself, having seen it from a video store way back when, trying to track down that movie for my own collection has been mind-blowingly difficult. And I'm also waiting, I'm looking for Sub Rosa to do that one too.
Yeah, that was distributed in America by a company called Mogul Communications, and they did, really not much of a job putting it out. I had to drive all over the area for checking all sorts of video stores. I think that when it first came out, I could only find it in one store within 2 hours of where I lived, whereas with my next movie, Cannibal Hookers, that seemed to be in about 8 out of 10 stores I checked, because back then in the 80s, there were no video chains like Blockbuster Video or Hollywood Video or Family Video. Every video store back then was independently owned or family owned. And so there were these industry magazines that would come out every month that would have ads for all the new movies that they would recommend your store buy. And that's how family video stores maintained their inventory and got new titles, was by subscribing to these industry magazines and seeing what all the new movies were. And so with Cannibal Hookers, I was handled by a very ambitious company that was very industrious, and they took out full-page ads in these trade magazines so that it made my movie appear to be bigger and more high-profile than it really was. And so just because they spent so much money on advertising and pushing the movie, these stores thought, well, this isn't a big movie, I better get it. And so we ended up just pretty much the vast majority of the stores. When it came out in 1988, it stocked it. I even went to New York City and saw it all over video stores all over New York City. So I was really very pleased with the distribution. And then they were a Canadian distributor, and they were only supposed to be putting it out in Canada, but they ended up putting it out all over America. So a few years later, we actually licensed it to an American distribution company, because we technically had not licensed it for America yet. And so then, when the American company put it out, they did a good job, just like the Canadian company had, and they got it out all over the place all over again.
Well, and it's such a great name. I mean, Cannibal Hookers, it really does stand up there, with a Herschel Gordon. When I first saw that, I was, I thought Herschel Gordon Lewis, Wizard of Gore, Blood Feast, these really evocative names that somehow seem like you should have heard them before, but you haven't. And that's and you just know instantly, oh, I'm going to enjoy this.
Yeah, well, the title is super important, and I like to have concept titles whenever possible. And a concept title is a title that tells you very clearly what the movie is going to have in it. So most of my movies have a concept title. Like Scream Dream is not a concept title. That's sort of vague, not as vague as a title like Scream, which is completely ambiguous, because a movie called Scream can be anything. But when you have a huge budget and big stars like Drew Barrymore, you can get away with an ambiguous title. But when you're working on a really low budget like I do, it helps to have a concept title like Cannibal Hookers or Vampire Cop or Cannibal Cop or Hooker with a Hacksaw, titles that tell you exactly.
Dorm of the Dead.
These titles make no mystery about what you're going to see when you go see my movie Chainsaw Cheerleaders. You know exactly what will be in it. So I try to stay away from vague, ambiguous titles whenever possible. I did one movie 20 years ago for a producer who wanted to have more control. He put up about $100,000 for us to make it, but he was very, bossy, and he Well, he insisted on naming the movie himself, even though I wrote the script. He wrote a little outline for me to follow, and then based on his outline, I wrote the script. But he insisted on titling it because that was a big thing to him, to be the one that came up with the title. And so he called it Deadly Memories, which I really hate that title because it just
Body Shop, right? It was that your original title for it?
I needed to call it Body Shop because it was a movie about a killer killing people in an auto body shop, but he wanted to call it Deadly Memories, which doesn't really mean anything.
It means, I remember, so I own that movie, and I love that movie, and I love Robert Zadar, and that was really exciting to see him work with you, and I want to ask about that, but I also remember buying it and being completely confused by the title when I went through the film.
Yeah, I mean, I begged him not to call it that. I can't tell you how many times I begged him. I tried to explain to him why that was a bad title, why it would just leave the audience totally confused. But he insisted. He was like an egomaniac, and he insisted that he name the movie. And so, so it's unfortunate. I think with Body Shop, it would have had better distribution and would have done better. And then on top of that, he gave it to a really terrible distribution company. This company I won't name, but they were a company for a crappy distribution, and also notorious for never paying royalties. And so, he got screwed doubly. First, he was screwed by his own rotten title, and second, he was screwed by his rotten distribution company.
Well, he
had a bigger budget than a lot of my movies, because he gave it a big budget with $100,000, and it was shot on film. And then he even had enough budget that he hired the WWE's pyrotechnics guy to do car explosions for us, and he hired a helicopter pilot to do aerial photography. So we had a lot of expensive bells and whistles on that movie for it to end up having such crappy distribution. I've done $2,000 movies that had better distribution than that one had.
One thing that I like about, actually almost all of your movies, I really love the cover art that gets put on the distribution, especially your current ones. And I was curious on how much control you had over that, because on Body Shop, Deadly Memories, the cover is a little, again, with the title on the cover, I didn't know anything. It's a welding mask. And so it could be any kind of movie. It could be an episode of NCIS. I really had no idea.
It wasn't the worst one we've had. It was basically the face of a victim being killed reflected in the glass of a welding mask. And the only notable thing about that is that the victim who is seen on the cover is actually Blake Mankowski, who's now famous as the founder of Tom's Shoes, who's one of America's biggest success story entrepreneurs. Right, a few years after we filmed with him, he went to L.A. and founded Tom's Shoes, and now he's a huge success story. He's even done his own MasterCard commercial telling about his business, and he's been on lots of big TV talk shows like Chelsea lately. And
that is great. That is so crazy how things loop around.
So yeah, I hired him fresh off of The Amazing Race. He'd been on that TV show The Amazing Race and finished third. And when I hired him, he was, living in Nashville. But then it was right after we finished that he moved to LA and founded Tom's Shoes, which I guess you can see at all the Whole Food stores. He's one of my two actors to found a prominent charity. The other one is Mary Finero, that was the star of my first movie, my first feature, Demon Queen. She founded this charity called Omni, which with she's best friends with Courtney Cox, so she and Courtney founded this Omnipiece. So if you go to YouTube, there's all sorts of Omnipiece videos they've got all over telling all about her charity.
People always say it's great to have friends in high places, but it's also great to have friends who start in low places and then become high places.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that she doesn't brag to Courtney that she's in Demon Queen.
I would, but I understand I'm probably not the norm on that one.
You had my movie and Tim Ritter's first movie back to back, because she also is a star of Tim's first movie, Truth or Dare. And in that movie, Tim had two future celebrities in that, because he had one of those boy band guys in his movie, either I think from Backstreet Boys or one of those type of groups. I don't really keep up with them, but I know he had a famous boy band member in his movie that was just a teenager when he filmed that thing.
It's nice to be able to get people that are like, oh, this will be great when we re-release it later. New title on the new first name on the cover kind of deal.
Yeah, I'm surprised they haven't done that. I'm surprised they never have re-released it, putting the boy band guy's name in huge letters like he's the star of it, because the movies have done that.
Yeah, I would.
Rain,
If it were
the
my
Devil's
film I
Rain,
was distributing.
yeah, they re-released The Devil's Rain and made you think John Travolta was the star, and he really had a teeny
Yeah.
tiny part.
Yeah, for sure. I've fallen victim to that many times. Like, wow, so and so. Like, oh yeah. They're in the background. They sell the ice cream cone. In the late '90s, early 2000s, you did kind of a string of work for producers. You did some action flicks in there, right? I think you did Demolition Highway, right?
Yeah, I did a whole string of more expensive movies that were shot on film, but I was working for the string of producers that flatly refused to let me do a horror movie during that period. So it wasn't my choice to do these action movies.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather do horror movies if I have a choice. But first, I worked with this one producer that I did 4 movies in a row with him, and he basically put up a slightly over $1 million budget for the 4 movies. So we had $250,000 about per film. And the only catch was that there were 2 catches. Because they all had to be either action movies or murder mystery kind of thrillers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the catch was he had to be the male lead in all of them. So,
is this am I going on a limb here? Is this Danny Fendley or?
Yeah. So
yeah.
I did these movies for him. The first one, he had already started pre-production when I got involved. And so I was hired onto that movie to work on the crew. And then before that movie was finished, they ended up junking the last 15 minutes that the director had shot. And then they promoted me to co-director and had me redo the final 15 minutes.
Was that Deadly Run?
So I got a co-directing credit on that because the director's final 15 minutes was totally unusable. A lot of it was because his handpicked director of photography about ruined the last part of the movie. He also ruined another scene that they ended up keeping, but because Danny had done something really extravagant for making a low-budget local movie. He had hired a director from Scotland instead of hiring somebody local. That anytime you hire somebody out of town to work on your movie, right away you've got to put them in a hotel, which is going to raise your budget,
mm-hmm.
and you give them 3 meals a day, which is going to raise your budget. So it always makes sense if you're hiring crew to hire local people that live where you're shooting, so you don't have to be putting them in motels and giving them all these meals. But not only did Danny hire this director that he had to fly all the way over from Scotland for some bizarre reason, that the director then talked him into hiring all his best friends from his crew, which meant he ended up flying like 15 people from Scotland over, because this movie had like a 30-person crew, and at least half the crew were from Scotland. So I never saw such a bizarre waste. It was just, bizarre. Why would you waste? And that movie ended up costing the most of the 4 movies I did for him, and it didn't even have any celebrities in it. It cost the most because there was all this huge waste going on, like hiring all these Scottish people and flying them over here. And then the Scottish DP director personally recommended ended up not even knowing what he was doing, and he ruined several scenes of the movie by underexposing them and shooting them too dark.
Have you ever had that happen? Because I've seen so many projects where I've been in the room, and I shouldn't say so many, but in several projects, I've been in the room, I've watched them, like, that was great. And then, the dailies or the shots come out later and they're like, we can't use this. And you just are so frustrated. Like, what was the DP thinking? Like, what happened?
That's one of the disadvantages from the days when people shot on film. You couldn't see your footage till you got your stuff back in the lab and could look at your images. And so maybe by the time you see that something has been exposed incorrectly, it's too late to redo it. So that's why it's a big advantage nowadays shooting digital, where you can see what you shot immediately, and if there's a problem you shot, you can correct it immediately while you still have your actors there, and not have to moan about it a few days later. Because usually it's these movies we were doing with Danny Finley, we were lucky to be able to see our footage 2 days later, and by then it was too late.
I will say, you said there were no celebrities. I think most of us would agree with that, but I will say I was kind of interested to hear your experience with Joe Estevez. Was that like a one-day shoot? Because I think he played the bad guy in that, right? In Demolition Highway.
No, we had him with us for like pretty much 5 days. We had Joe with us for the better part of a week. And it was a great experience because Joe was a really super great guy, and we all loved working with him, and he was super accommodating, and he didn't have any star ego. He was, willing to, get down there and do what it took to get the movie shot. And he was nails everything on the first take and is a total professional. So, yeah, you couldn't ask for a better actor than Joe.
That's great, because I remember I one of my favorite 90s flicks that I saw at the time, like, when it came out, was Soul Taker. And to see Joe Estevez and Robert Zadar, and then come back and see them in your films with Demolition Highway, and then later with Body Shop, it was nice. I was kind of getting like, I feel like it's a one little family.
Yeah, I'm happy for Joe, especially now that he's probably more popular now than he's ever been, since he has that hit show on Adult Swim called Decker, where he co-stars with Tim Heidecker from the Tim and Eric show. And so now that he's got this Adult Swim show, I'd say Joe probably has more fans than he's ever had in his life.
And it's funny because I always felt like Joe was one of those guys that, a lot like you and a lot of the people you cast and work with, their work is loved and it's appreciated, but they just don't seem to break through that next level where there's like a broad understanding of who they are, like beyond
Joe
the piece.
Joe, when you close your eyes, Joe's voice sounds exactly like his brother's Martin Sheen.
Completely.
And Joe was telling me that, everybody knows this brother is Joe, on the other hand, will do whatever job, will pay the rent. And so he was telling me that he's constantly being offered radio ads where they just want his voice
right,
for conservative causes. So he'll do these ads for these conservative interests, and it just drives his brother Martin Sheen crazy, because then everybody thinks Martin Sheen has switched and is now a Republican. And so he says he'll get these screaming phone calls from his brother cussing him out for doing these conservative ads. Says, "You got to stop doing that. People think it's me."
That is hilarious. Oh, that's fantastic. I want to make sure we get into time to talk, and I want to know too. So your next movie, Debbie Does Demons. You've been, I want to say you've been a little tight-lipped about what's actually in this movie.
Yeah, I just put a synopsis of it on Facebook a couple of days ago. So if anybody wants to read the plot synopsis, I put a little quick synopsis on there for people that want to know what it's about. But
that's awesome.
It's basically a horror comedy that's about a girl that has to deal with demons.
I was gonna say, it sounds like a sexy horror comedy.
Well, that's all of my movies have that, so a little sexiness and a little horror mixed together. But this one is, I'm just trying to refine it a little more with this one. And so with this one thing I'm doing a little different is a few years ago I directed a play that we put on in Nashville, which was a really good experience. And we, so when you're doing a play, obviously the actors have to have all the lines memorized where they can run through it from beginning to end with no breaks. They don't have, without having to constantly check their scripts. So we did this play based on a play by the Marquis de Sade called Philosophy in the Bedroom. And then after we did the play and the play had ended, I wanted to film it to have it for posterity. So I got the actors all together, and we were able to film an entire movie of their performance in like one afternoon, even though it was an hour, 15-minute play. Since everybody knew their lines, we were able to shoot the thing in about 6 or so hours and shoot a final product that would be about an hour 15. And about 30 minutes of this movie I made is going to be an extra feature on the Hooker with a Hacksaw DVD that's coming out in a couple of months. But anyway, that way of working, where you're working, where actors have to treat it like a play and not like a movie, I wanted to bring a little bit of that to Debbie Does Demons. So I wrote the script where it would work as both a movie and a play, where if you took away some of the fight scenes and some of the effects, it would be something you could actually perform on a stage. So I've written it where if I ever in the future wanted to put it on as a play, I would be able to with only slight changes to the script. And because it's so dialogue heavy, I'm going to have to insist that the actors do a better job of trying to learn as many of their lines before we come to the shooting day as possible, so that we don't have to stop and wait around while people study their lines. Because, when you have the full script from top to bottom, that's a big advantage. Then you can just burn through the shooting. Whereas when you have actors that don't know their lines and they have to be studying their lines before the shot, you can have a lot of downtime just sitting around twiddling your thumb while you're waiting for somebody to learn their lines.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a big thing that a lot of people still don't know is it's not a stage play. A lot of actors, especially, I mean, some of the biggest names, they don't read the script and you get there and, what's the line? Okay. They do the line.
So yeah, but if I ever did want to do Debbie, I think Debbie Does Demons would work really good as a play. So I might, who knows, in a year or two, I might want to put it on as a play at one of these theaters around here because I think it would draw a good crowd with a title like that. And so I've got it written where if I needed to do it, because a lot of my movies, there's no way I could do them as a play with the script as the script exists, because the script may have too many locations. But the Debbie Does Demon scripts, I think it actually would work as a play, and so I tried to write it that way on purpose.
That's really interesting, and I'd love to see that. And you said the 30 minutes of the play that you shot is going to be on the Hooker with a Hacksaw physical copy that's coming out?
That's right. It's going to be the main special feature along with audio commentary and Casper, the star of the movie. So that'll be something I know I just talked to the distributor, and they are getting ready to do the DVD replication, and they've got the cover layout almost finished. So they're in the final stages now of getting the DVD ready, and hopefully it'll be out around September or so.
Cool. Well, and that's and just to kind of give fans, that's Hooker with a Hacksaw is starring Casper Meltadair, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And she's going to be in this new one, Debbie Does Demons.
Yeah, she's going to be in this one. This will be her fourth movie with me because she first had a co-starring role in Cannibal Cop, and then she was the star of Hooker with a Hacksaw, and then she was part of an ensemble cast on Cannibal Hookers, and now she'll be in this one too. So this will be our fourth movie together.
That's great. And I mean, she also co-wrote Hooker with a Hacksaw, right?
Yeah, she wrote a lot of her own dialogue. She had a lot of, and then she came up with ideas for scenes. So she contributed ideas for scenes, and so she had some good ideas, so I tried to use her input whenever possible.
That's awesome. I think as someone who works behind the scenes and in front of the camera, having a director and producer who are willing to take your ideas, especially when you're kind of in the thick of it and it feels like I know what's going to work here, that's always a nice thing.
So it was good with makeup, and she's helped us with makeup too. She was also a makeup, helped Mason with makeup on Hooker with a Hacksaw too.
Well, and there's I love the intestine orgy scene. Was a pretty fantastic scene. That was my personal standout.
Yeah, Mason handmade those intestines. He made those from scratch.
I was trying to figure it out because, so often you look and you're like, is that sausage? Is it like, what am I looking at? And I was like, no, that looks like it was made for this purpose. So that's definitely an interesting one.
He told me his main ingredient was women's hose. But yeah, he's really good at building. You just tell him to build something and he can build it. I know for Hooker with a Hacksaw, I also needed a severed leg that would spray blood at several points, and he made that for us. And
yeah, I was going to say the blood spray in Hooker with a Hacksaw was effective. It was very noticeable, and Casper was not afraid to let everything get dirty, which is always what you want in front of the camera.
Yeah, we were in that big room with a drain on the floor, so at the end of the day, we just got out the hose, and Mason was able to wash everything down.
That's great. I want to wrap it up so you can work on all this. Are you actually working a lot right now? I don't know what the lockdown or the Miss Rona end of the world situation that we're facing right now. I know here in Palm Springs, everything's still pretty tight because we're having a hard time with it. Has it hurt anything on your end?
No, not really. Everything's pretty much the same as always for me. It hasn't really caused me to, I have a regular job. I haven't lost any days on my regular job, and I'm just still preparing for this project. The only thing we're going to do differently when we're shooting the new movie is, so this will be the first movie I've shot since the coronavirus, and so we'll be trying to have the bare minimum number of people on the set. We'll probably be wearing masks when we're not filming, and encourage people to wear masks, and maybe it'd be a good idea if we can get one of those laser temperature things, to take everybody's temperature.
It's one of those things that you get a lot of people, especially, and I understand it, we have a lot of small businesses out our way and they're suffering, but at the same time, I have family on the East Coast where people are telling them that, oh, it's nothing, like this isn't real. And then out here, I'm like, we see people, we know people who've passed away. It's no joke. So I always try and urge, and our listeners, make sure, stay safe for yourself, for other people. And thank God you're still making the movie, because movies are drying up and I'm waiting for some new stuff. And I want to mention too that you've got Debbie Does Demons on Indiegogo right now, I think for another couple of weeks till July 8th.
That's right.
And so, and people can go in, you can donate, you can actually get a producer credit, which I'm very proud Cult and Classic podcast put ours in. So that's exciting. I'm looking forward to the DVD when that eventually rolls out.
They can get a producer credit, or they can get the Blu-ray, or they can get a poster, or so those are just some of the perks they can get if they go to the Debbie Does Demons Indiegogo page.
And the posters are fantastic. The artwork you've got for this is top. I love it. It's top notch.
Yeah. Well, that's just our teaser poster, and then once we start shooting, we'll make another poster that'll show the actual actors that are in the movie. Yeah, that's just a teaser poster, and then once we get going, we'll make several more posters. So that's one thing I like to do lately, is I like to make more than one poster for a movie. And for Cannibal Hookers, we had two really world-class artists that each made us a great poster. We had Graham Humphreys from England, who is the #1 cover artist for Arrow Video. He does about half of all the Arrow Video covers, and he did one great cover poster for us. And then we had an Italian artist, Gianpaolo Frizzi, who did another poster for us. So we'll probably be reaching out to some of our artist friends to do a poster once we have some stuff shot where they can use reference photos of our actors to use to base it on. So you say you're in Palm Springs, California?
Yep.
Oh, I'm amazed. Has anyone ever tried to make an indie movie in Palm Springs using that outer space-looking Bob Hope mansion as a background? Because I know his house in Palm Springs, it looks like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, and I have to say, I spoiler for those of us we haven't announced anything, but I'm personally working on a small little 50s style sci-fi project, because the desert landscape out here, I mean, I can't tell you, I walk out my back door and it's like I'm in Robinson Crusoe on Mars. You know what I mean? It's just it's a crazy thing. And then you have this really interesting, mid-century modern Art Deco funkiness all over the place, the statues, the signage, everything. So it's a totally kind of an otherworldly experience. My wife and I love it out here. And I haven't seen a lot done out here. They did a lot of Westerns back in the day, but it's also...
looking houses in Palm Springs, or is Bob Hope's the only one?
Nope, there are a lot of weird ones. There are a lot.
You see these photos of it, and it looked like that could be the perfect set for a sci-fi movie. It looks like a house from the future.
It's absolutely. I actually am pretty close to it, and I got to tell you, if you ever want to scout locations, drop me a line. We got room.
I read a biography of Bob Hope, and it turns out that he didn't even want to move to Palm Springs and live in that house. He was perfectly happy with his house in L.A., and it was his wife that insisted that they buy it. And they said he never liked that Palm Springs house, but he just went along with it because his wife bullied him into it.
I wouldn't be shocked. They've got the main thoroughfare through pretty much all the side-by-side towns out here is Bob Hope. And so every day you take that and you just I just think of my favorite bits of his.
How far are you from Coachella?
I think, let's see, probably about an hour, if that. Everything's pretty close together out here. The only thing I'll say about the downside out here, especially when you're talking about shooting, I mean, it is otherworldly hot when you get in during the day. I mean, today is a cool day and it's 106.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Palm Springs once in the 80s, and so I drove from LA to Palm Springs, where I took Interstate 10. So I drove by that dinosaur park that is used in the movies like Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Yep. My wife and I take photos there quite a bit. Interesting fact on that, it was actually purchased somewhat recently by a creationist museum, and they built a dinosaur play area next to it for kids, which is a very clandestine, funky way to teach children that dinosaurs aren't real. Very strange place.
Well, as long as they don't tear down the original statues
Exactly.
that are above them. I mean, I first saw him in that movie, Revenge of the Cheerleaders, and then I saw him in Pee Wee's Big Adventure. But I know they're still there. A friend of mine was there last year, and she showed me a lot of photos she took where she was able to crawl inside one of the dinosaurs' mouth, and you could take a photo of yourself in their mouth.
Yep. You have to pay to do it now, but it's still worth it. And they actually, some people were complaining, but they actually repainted it, and they did a decent job. It looks more like they did back in the day. So I'll give them credit for that. And it's always a fun place to go. And there's always it's in an empty, off the highway, nothing around it, desolated lot. So you just get these fantastic photos of these giant dinosaurs with you in front of it, and just hills and desert.
Well, the way I remember it is you can see it pretty clearly from Interstate 10. Even if you don't get off the interstate, you can still see it.
Yep. It's right there. And then the other side's got nothing. So it's worth it. It's worth at the very least a drive by if anybody is ever out here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, if I ever get out there again, it's always something fun to go look at.
For sure. And I want to give a shout out too. I was noticing again, and this isn't just in Hooker with a Hacksaw, but it's just freshest in my mind. You do a really cool job of showing a lot of different oddities around where you're filming, especially in Tennessee. I know Hooker with a Hacksaw, you have Casper sort of lounging or licking and doing all these weird things with a ton of different like statues. And one of them, it looks to me like maybe a drag queen cow with a frying pan.
You know, that was a tourist stop off the interstate in Kentucky, which is about 20 miles north of John Carpenter's hometown of Bowling Green, Kentucky. So, and it was a lot of the things that we had Casper interacting with are no longer there. Probably pretty much the only thing that she interacts with in that scene that is still there is the giant dinosaur where she sort of is rubbing up and down on the horns. But all the other statues, like the statue of the animal kind of woman with boobs, that's no longer there. And pretty much all the other statues, last time I was there, they were all gone. So it's sort of sad that the dinosaur is the only thing still there.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Donald Farmer, everyone. This is the master horror filmmaker that Joe Bob Briggs called Exploitation cheapie meister Donald Farmer, the one-man film industry of Tennessee. Thank you so much for being here. And as a parting gift, we will be sending you a test print of our brand new Cult and Classic podcast trading cards, which if you guys want one, we will be sending out one trading card autographed by the artist, which is yours truly, every month for our Patreon, our brand new patreon.com/Cult and Classic podcast. Definitely check it out. There's also a $10 tier a month where you get a zine that is custom made every month in addition to the trading card. And of course, you can always just donate whatever you can spare. $1 or anything gets you access to video recordings of all of our regular panel discussion podcasts. Thank you guys so much. As always, here to play us out is The Chud.